Owen, thank you so much for joining me. It's wonderful to have somebody to talk about happiness today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yes, and this is a great topic, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. But let's start where you had a bit of an epiphany, didn't you? A bit of an aha moment when walking the dog. So as soon as I read that, I thought, okay, I love this man. He loves dogs. So tell me about your
Yeah,
dog.
a lot of my inspiration. My little dog's Kate. She's a Westie. She's about 15, and we've had her since she's a pup. We've had her since 12 weeks old, and I suppose I spend a lot of time with the dog, and I'm out walking with the dog quite a bit. So a lot of my inspiration comes when I'm out and about with the dog. And I think as well, it's going to sound really cliched, but dogs are incredibly mindful. They're just in the moment, don't judge, and they just go. They take life as it comes, really. And I do think we've got a lot to learn from them. But I was out walking the dog and I was thinking about what I was going to do for the next book. So I'd done the first book and I really wanted to think carefully about what will I do next. And I was thinking about how we're driven as human beings. We've got these systems that we're driven by. And that's you've got a threat system, which is kind of very much an anxiety type system. And then you've got a drive system, and that's kind of the part of us that might be more ambitious or driven or likes to be preoccupied. And then we've got a system. So that's the part of us that's able to self-soothe. What I realized is probably 95, 95, 98% of people that come to me in therapy, what I discover really quickly is that they have very highly activated threat systems, or they have very highly activated drive systems, or both. But when it comes to how they self-soothe, how they regulate, most people genuinely don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to write next book around where I see people getting in the way of their own happiness, teaching people how to regulate better. And I suppose it's the bottom line. When I talk about happiness, think of happiness as fluffy, airy fairy. I think of it really, I think all of us know what it is to be happy. I think most of us know. I couldn't tell you, Maria, what it is for you to be happy. But I think at some level you will intuitively know what happiness means for you. And likewise for me. But I think the one thing most people don't realize is that they get in the way of their own happiness almost unconsciously. I
Yeah,
suppose that
no.
10 times happier was about me identifying 10 areas where I see people, regardless of their background or their story, get stuck over and over and over again, and helping them recognize that, and importantly, helping people through that and how they move through it. So that was the aha moment for the book and the dog.
Fantastic. And actually, my dog is 15 as well, and he's a
Oh,
cotton.
wow.
And I've had him since he was a pupster. And I think maybe he's a boy, he and Katie might have got on. There you go. We never know. I don't know if they'll ever meet now, but.
We could have a romance. Well, mine's is quite, I mean, she still likes the boys, so, who
Oh.
knows?
Oh, anyway, so listen, let's dig a bit deeper into these 10 themes that you discovered. And the first one actually, which is really interesting, is to stop looking at the past. And I always thought you're supposed to learn from the past, but I mean, I suppose you are, but you don't want us to stay there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose look, my approach is very much helping people to function. And unapologetically, as a therapist, it's my approach. Some people may go for a more analytical approach where they're in analysis for 15, 20 years. And for some people, that's really important and they may need that. But I suppose broadly, in my experience, most people just want to learn how to be a bit happier and how to function better and how they enjoy their life a bit more. And I think what I a lot is everyone will come with a story, regardless of who they are, everyone will come with a story fast. And my argument is look, make sense of your story, understand why you struggle, understand why you might get as an adult. And part of it is very most likely linked to what's happened in the background and in the past. So you can make sense of it and you can salvage part of that story, but you don't need to take it with you and ruminate. And I suppose really, if you look at a definition of depression, and I'm not a huge fan of diagnosis, but depression is often maintained by rumination, and rumination is when you replay over and over and over again in detail. So my argument is don't disregard your past, go to it, look at your story, connect all the dots together. But then there is a point when you have to make a decision. Okay, I need to let go now and I need to look forward. And for me, there's something quite powerful about that, that when people get on board with that, suddenly you can see them almost becoming unlocked.
I like that. I like the fact that you're not to ruminate and stay there. That's really good advice. You actually made me laugh with the next theme. You made me laugh out loud. It's called Get Out of Your Head, but you made me laugh because you said you sabotaged your own happiness on a mindfulness retreat. I mean, for heaven's sake.
So yeah, so this is an interesting one. So I went off to treat. Well, I was doing lots of mindfulness courses, and I had this notion at the time. You know, I think often in our world as therapists, you can start off believing that there's a certain way to be and a certain way to behave. And I had this desire. You know, I would look at some of my colleagues or some of my peers, and some of them appeared to be very, very mindful. And I was genuinely and have been interested in meditation for a long time. But I thought I'm going to go off and do this properly. And I went off and I did my mindfulness teacher training with Oxford. So it was a really good course. The people were brilliant on it. And I had lots of notions about what it was going to be like, how it was going to be. And I went to a particular meditation one day and I was really interested in the meditation. And I got there and I started to, you know, get into meditation mode, and I was getting irritated by everything and everybody in the room. There's a guy beside me and he kind of had his legs crossed and he had the blanket around him, and he, you know, he had all the perfect placement and he was irritating me. People breathing in the room were irritated, people outside. And I remember at one point thinking, oh, fucking hell, you know, I can't do this. And, you know, everything, it couldn't have been any further away from a meditative space, really. I was just irritated by everybody. The kind of narrative in my head was just purely being agitated, frustrated, almost dislike and envy of people in the room who seemed to be doing it properly. So anyway, to cut a long story short, this was day 4 of the retreat. And I looked around and I felt a bit of a fraud. And I thought, what am I doing here? I mean, these people are all perfect meditators. And so you had a mentor session after the meditation. And I had a brilliant woman called Melanie Fennell, who's like an expert in meditation in the UK. And I sat down and I talked with her and I said, look, I'm going to be really honest. I don't think I should be here. And she said, why not? And I said, well, shall I just talk you through what was going through my head in that meditation? So we talked and I told her my thoughts on the guy beside me and what I thought people outside who were making noise, and someone beside me was breathing and they were irritating me. And I said, all I was conscious of, that all of these actions were going on in my mind. And then she said, you think that's a bad meditation? And I said, well, it couldn't be any further from a meditative state. And she went, sounds like a perfect meditation to me. You know, the fact that you were able to acknowledge and recognize that you had all this action on is meditation. Meditation's not about being blissfully peaceful and getting to a state of absolute ease. Meditation is a recognition. I'm agitated, I'm angry, I'm distracted. So you recognize it, and then you come back to the breath or whatever your point of focus is. And then if you drift off again, you come back. And that's how you train. I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings of meditation. People think it's all about fluffy loveliness and feeling warm. It's not. You're training the mind every time it goes off to come back. And the more conscious you are of the distracting and the mind going off and doing things, and you have the ability to go back, that's meditation, and that's where you improve the plasticity of the brain, really. So
That's fascinating. That really is fascinating because I've always rejected and avoided meditation because I thought it was about clearing the mind out. But you're saying, no, it's acknowledging the stuff that's coming in and then training it. So that makes me much more comfortable.
I think it's interesting. The world of meditation, sometimes I think it gets promoted quite badly, because for some people the idea of meditation as a concept works very, very well for them. But I also think that there's a bulk of the population out there who think meditation is far removed from them and it's not for them. Well, actually, what you're doing with meditation, it's a bit like going to the gym. You know, your brain it's a muscle, and like every other muscle in the body, it's going to need maintenance. So when you go into meditation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about chants or breathing, there are many ways of meditating. What you're doing is you're training the brain. So you're trying to reduce all of the activity in the mind. So for anybody listening or watching today, you know, if you've got a lot of activity and it feels like you're on overdrive all the time, meditation teaches you how to quieten the noise, how to bring everything down a few levels. And each time you do that, what you're doing is you're actually changing the neuroplasticity of the brain. So even one action, they reckon that if I'm talking to you at the moment and I was kind of trying to be meditative and I suddenly become aware of a distraction, and then I think, oh, I've gone off, and I come back, in that moment, you've reprogrammed your pathway. So you're creating much order in the brain. And that's surprising because the more ordered you are and the more contained, so instead of chaotic neural pathway firing, it starts to become slower and much more regulated. Then as a human being, you're going to feel steadier. So it's a really powerful tool.
Do you know that's wonderful for focus because at the moment it's so hard to focus. You've got so many distractions. I think that's a really great way to focus better. Um, okay, so Owen, the next area you talk about is no regrets. I mean, I think that's a really tricky one because surely it requires us to deal with our past, doesn't it? Which you were saying we're not supposed to dwell there. So how do we have no regrets?
Well, it's not about, it's about everyone will have regrets. So again, it's a similar principle, but it's the same challenge of if people get caught up in regrets and they constantly ruminate or go over what could have been, what should have been, what they could have done differently, then suddenly they become stuck again. And remember, the whole concept of my work is about helping people become unstuck. And my argument is that for every one of us as human beings, regardless of what we do, what decisions we make, what we've done, what our life has been previously, it's about what you take from that. Regrets are generally pointless. They achieve nothing because all they do is create a very negative, self-critical state. What I say to people if I'm working particularly with regret, I'll say, okay, well, instead of it being what you've lost, what you could have done, what you should have done, what about we focus on what you've learned?
Mm.
What did that event teach you? What would you do differently again? How can you make amends if you need to make amends? And what would help you make forward? And what develops you as a human being? So essentially, it becomes about living in a state of not being regretful, but being somebody who's open to learn from the experience. And it goes back again to some of what I mentioned earlier about this self-compassion, really. It's all about how we relate to yourself as human beings. And most people give themselves a pretty tough time. And a big part of my work is helping people to see that they're doing that because, again, it's often quite unconscious. People don't realize that that narrative in the head is quite critical. I try to get people to see, can you hear that noise? Can you hear the content? Can you hear the tone of your voice towards yourself? And then when that coin drops, then suddenly you've got liberation because you can do something about that.
Yeah, it sounds so simple, but actually it's not that easy, is it, to control that voice in your head? I totally get that. Okay, that's brilliant. So listen, there's one in your book that for me, I think I inherited this. Tell me if it's possible from from a therapist's point of view. This is if you can inherit. I'm a worrier. I worry about things that will never happen. I worry about things that will happen in many years' time, but I start worrying in advance because I like to be prepared with my worry. I'm in that worry trap, and I think I got that from my mum. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, there are a lot of schools of thought on anxiety and worry, but I think we are taught to worry, particularly within family scripts or patterns. So we all inherit scripts and patterns from our family. So if you've come from an environment where worry was quite prominent, or there was a key person within the family that worried, then of course, as kids, we take all that by example, don't we? We don't know what's right or wrong. We just take it all on board. So I do think you can inherit worry. We also know from the research is that, of course, certain personality types will worry more than others, and that's just kind of genetic. And we also know that life experience, if even outside of family, if you've been in an environment or a culture, so I talk very openly about my own story. I grew up in Belfast during the Troubles, so I didn't realize that I worried until I left, because when I lived there, all of the violence and the bombs and the fear that was there all of the time was a very normal state. And I didn't realize that actually to live like that was abnormal. And it was when I moved to London and I suddenly realized that I'd sort of almost been hardwired to worry because I was in this hypervigilant state all of the time. That kind of came with me. So in my early 20s, when I recognized, God, I worry more than I want to, it was it's a big wake up moment for me.
Could you
So I think
stop it? How'd you stop it though, Owen?
Well, I think it's the thing. I mean, again, if you go back to the kind of the neuroscientific stuff, you've got a part on the brain on the right hand side called the amygdala, and it's basically like a threat center, and it's a good thing because if you were under threat at the moment, or if a tiger or a lion came into your room, or someone was chasing you, your threat system would be activated, and that response would get you out of the room, or it would encourage you to get to a place of safety. So threat mechanisms are a good thing. The problem is when they're working all of the time. So for example, if you're at work and you're worried that you're going to lose your job, or you're not good enough, or your boss thinks you're not good enough, and you're in this hyper extended state of worry all of the time, your amygdala is probably working harder than it needs to, unnecessarily. So as a human being, your job is to recognize that and realize that you're not defined as a warrior. It just means that your brain, a part of your brain, is on hypervigilant alert, probably too much. So your job is to recognize that and learn how to switch it off. And that's often what I talk about in my books. How do you stop? How do you reset? How do you deactivate those threat systems in the brain? And then suddenly you become balanced again and you feel more stable. So, you've inherited worry, but it doesn't define you as a human being.
Okay, all right. I shall work on that. Brilliant. So, habits. I've got some bad habits, Owen.
Haven't we all?
Well, yes, but I find that, you see, I do, my brain goes like crazy all the day because I'm dealing with people like you who are hyper intelligent, who've got lots to share, and I'm trying to keep up with you. And that's exhausting. And I get to the end of the day and I just want to relax. I break out the wine and sometimes the chocolate, sometimes both together. And that's become a bit of a habit, and it's not great. Do I need to worry about it?
Look, again, you mentioned at the beginning the question about our three systems, threat, drive, and soothe that I talk about. So often with habits, what's normally going on. So I'm not saying that it's wrong to have a drink or a bit of chocolate. Of course, like everything in life, it's moderation. I love chocolate. I have an occasional drink. So there's nothing wrong with having stuff in life that you enjoy. Where it becomes problematic is that when a habit starts to interfere with your life, and it starts to interfere with your functioning, your relationships, how you deal with life, how you see life, then I think it's worth stopping to look at whether the pattern or the habit needs reviewed. And the thing with habits are they often feel quite good. I suppose I got quite lucky in a way. I'm an Irish Catholic, and the ethos of Irish Catholicism back in the day, certainly for me, was if it feels good, it must be bad. So when I was a good Catholic boy, I was much better with habits. And I do think it's possible for everybody to change habits that are not useful for their life. So I would never ever say to anyone, you need to change this habit. The person has to get there independently. I might help somebody try to recognize that they've fallen into habits that are not helping them or actually getting in the way of their life. And again, it's about how you recognize the habit. You look at the impact on your life, and then you then start to work at methods and ways of breaking habits. And then again, people get to a point of freedom and flexibility. So, keep going, have a drink, have a bit of chocolate. As long as you feel it's not controlling you, I don't see the issue.
Well, being an Italian Catholic, I can go to confession afterwards, can't I? I said I had a bit too much wine. And we start on the wine quite early, the blood of Christ, etc. Anyway, let's not go into religion here. You see, anyway. So listen, something that I see a lot in the speaking world is comparison, where one speaker is looking at another speaker who's a competitor, and that speaker may be getting booked more, or might get booked over them, or might have a higher fee, and they're comparing each other. And you say that comparison is the thief of joy, and I see the joy draining from their faces when they ask me the question, who was booked instead of me, and it's the competitor. So why do we do that to ourselves? Why do we do this comparison thing?
I mean, I think it's kind of innate in our DNA as humans to compare against each other. And in some ways, it can be a good thing. It can help us evolve. It helps us develop. Without competition, we wouldn't push ourselves forward. But I think particularly probably over the last 10 years with social media in particular, we all watch what's going on in people's worlds. And I think we all make the assumption that people are happier and that they have better lives, or that they're achieving more than we are. And of course, people will only ever put on social media what they want you to see, by and large. So often what you get is you get a very false representation of what's going on in someone else's world. And my premise is, and even in my own world, it's about what's important to me, what matters to me. what's my story? This is going to sound very cliched, but what's my authentic truth? And I think if I show up every day doing what I do, enjoying what I do, and just trusting in the process and learning to not over engage on what my competitors are doing or what somebody else is doing, I know as a human being I'm much happier, because ultimately it doesn't matter to me. There's a great expressions, someone else's chapter 10 might be your chapter 1, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. So I just kind of think, work with, stay with your journey, your cause, your message, do that truthfully, authentically, and the rest works itself out. Because, any human being, when they start to compare and measure, they will talk about an increase in anxiety or a decrease in mood. And I think, well, why engage in something that isn't going to make you feel better? So again, break the pattern and just come back inwards, go to your own story, go to your own journey.
So here's a question for you though. Is it good to compare against yourself and see how you have grown? So you look at you compare against what you've achieved as opposed to what somebody else is doing?
I think it's a brilliant question. And I think it's a useful thing to do, to measure and say, okay, where was I 5 years ago? Where was I 10 years ago? I think as long as that's done with a compassionate voice, and that it's not done with, because it's easy to fall into the trap and think, okay, 10 years ago, I was doing this and I'm now here. And then that critical voice jumps in and says, yeah, but you thought you were going to be here. And you thought you were going to be so much bigger and so much better. I think it's about recognizing that almost saboteur voice that jumps in from the back to tell you that it's not enough, that it's good enough, or you're not good enough. That's the voice to watch out for, and not to be
Okay.
repeated.
Okay, good advice. I love that. So it's not often that I get to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre. So thank you for that and including
Yeah,
him in your book. I had to study Jean-Paul Sartre in French
yeah.
yes, I know. And yes, I've
I
still
studied
got.
philosophy as well. I was in a monastery, believe it or not, in my late teens, early 20s for 3 years. So we had to study all of the philosophers. So I'm interested in what people think about the world.
Yeah, no, wonderful. So I love the fact that one of your chapters is called Hell is Other People, which you gave an example of, in fact, when you said you were irritated by the man in, with his what did you say? He had a towel around him or a
Yeah,
blanket round him, and you were irritated by somebody's breathing. So is that what you mean by hell is other people?
it's in part what I mean, but I think the whole time as human beings, we're in conflict. So if you look at the best movies or the best soap operas that are out there, they do well and the ratings go up when you've got conflict. So you got this whole drama is conflict. So that's what people are interested in. And I think in everyday life, everyone is acting out their own stuff. So as human beings, it's unavoidable, really. We're in conflict all of the time. Now, here's where it gets really, really interesting. I know who I am as a human being, and you know who you are as a human being. And I think if you've done any work on yourself, or you've taken any time out to reflect, you kind of know what your stuff is. You think, okay, my button's been pressed. I'm not going to respond. I'm angry. This is not their stuff. This is my stuff. And if you can take responsibility for that, then you can manage the conflict. But what happens in the real world is that all of the time people are acting out their stuff. Next time you go into a meeting and there's a group of people together and you watch somebody getting irritated or someone getting angry, it's because most of the time their button has been pressed. They've been activated. So what you get in human life a lot of the time is that everyone is splurging out their own internal world. And very often not regulating very well. So that often means that we end up in conflict with people, or people can appear difficult or challenging to be around. And my premise is that when you begin to understand that, then you can begin to see people differently. And I try and work up a premise: if someone's rude to me, or they're difficult, or they're challenging, I have this really simple premise in my head that I try to make an assumption that they're suffering in some way. That if my instinct is to want to respond in the same way or be horrible to them or to be toxic in my behavior, it's never helpful. Two people behaving in the same way never leads to anything productive. So particularly when I'm working with teams, I see this a lot. When people start to mirror each other's behavior, you get chaos. Whereas actually when people start to understand each other and see, okay, they're reacting because they may be struggling today, or this is their area of weakness, or this is something that they find difficult, then you start to see people in the world differently. And I think, that hell is other people. I think a lot of people do find others difficult. That can be family members, it can be relationships, it can be work. And learning, again, it's about coming back inwards. When you understand who you are and how you operate and how you tick, then you can manage that, you can control that. And it just then means that you will then respond better to somebody else. I'll give you a good example, actually. I had somebody be really rude to me in a shop a while back, totally unnecessarily. It was one of the big high street supermarkets. And I think I'd asked for a bag or something, and she hadn't heard me. And I then said again, "Could I have a bag?" And then she said, "I heard you." And I said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you heard me." And then eye contact dropped. There was a lot of kind of quite passive aggressive behavior. And I thought initially, so you get that initial annoyance, thinking, "Oh, that's a bit unfair. That's not necessary, really." So I thought, will I respond or will I react? And I just kind of took a breath for a minute. And then I looked at her and I said, "Are you having a bad day?" And then she just stopped and she said, and then there was this, like, I watched her well up. And then she just stopped. And I noticed, she started to cry. And then she said, "Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. Yes." And she was clearly having a tough day. And I said, "Oh, don't worry, we all get them." And then we just entered into this conversation. And she was okay and it was fine. And she turned out to be quite lovely, interestingly. And I thought about it afterwards. In that moment, if I had responded to whatever was going on for her in the same way, and if I had argued with her, or I had shouted at her or reported her to her boss, I would have just aggravated the situation even more. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to be assertive or to stand your ground. There are moments when I think it's okay to boundary behavior and say, actually, that's not good enough. But in this particular moment, the person was clearly suffering. And I think when we respond to people in that way, then not only do we feel better, but actually the other person tends to behave better. So then what you get, it's a win-win all around. So I think it's about recognition of your own stuff and making sure that doesn't spill out onto other people. And with other people, recognition, maybe they're struggling too.
Okay, so here's a bit of a controversial question here. Based on that,
I
should
like
you,
that.
do you like controversial?
Yeah.
Should you ever remove somebody from your life because they are perhaps a really negative energy, or because they bring you down, or because you're constantly having to prop them up, or should you be dealing with them in a different way?
I think it's about how you do it. I mean, I talk about, in my first book, I talk about two types of people, drains and radiators. And drains are people who tend to drag us down. The radiators are the people who build us up. And I think all human relationships are about give and take. And I think if you're in a relationship, you've got a friendship where it's one way and you're giving a lot and you're getting nothing back, I think it's completely reasonable to boundary that, to have the conversation, and to at least, open the conversation saying this is not really good enough, because then you give somebody the opportunity to change or to reflect or to think about it. And I think then if people don't respond and they're not being respectful in the relationship, or it's not give and take, then I think it's completely reasonable as long as it's done in a way that's kind and compassionate. I think, dumping a friend by text or just ghosting them and stuff, I think that's tough and it's really unfair. I think at least give the person the opportunity to have the conversation, um, and explore it a bit. And then I think if you get to a point where it doesn't go anywhere, then I think if it's something that's not good for your life, then I don't think that's a wrong thing. We all have to take responsibility for our actions in life. And if somebody isn't, I mean, I've had some people in my life over the years, and they get stuck in particular areas and they like to complain and they like to go over all the terrible stuff and they want a lot of support and they just want you to be sympathetic and kind. But if they're not making any actions to change their life, then you can't do anything about that. So ultimately, I often think that compassion can be quite challenging. Compassion isn't about being lovely and nice and sweet and, oh my God, it's terrible. I mean, good therapy, as a therapist, if I'm supervising a junior therapist, good therapy is uncomfortable. Good therapy should not feel fluffy and nice and, oh, isn't this wonderful? Good therapy should make somebody feel a bit uneasy, because that's challenging their patterns and it's going to move them forward. It's not saying that they should feel uncomfortable the entire process, but it shouldn't feel good all of the time, and it can't feel good all the time because you're helping someone move forward. So to go back to your original question, absolutely, I think we all have to make decisions about the people we surround ourselves with. It impacts our life massively.
Okay, wonderful. Listen, I could talk to you all day. We haven't covered all of the 10 areas. And in fact, if anybody wants to then dive into the other areas, obviously they can get your book, and we'll put links in the notes. So I'm going to finish with a question for you, a personal question. When are you at your happiest?
I'm at my happiest when I'm quiet, actually, and when things are. I've discovered this is a getting older thing. I'm happiest when things are simple. It really is. I mean, it's come back to the dog, actually. When I'm out walking the dog, or I'm just in the park, or I'm just chilling at home, watching a movie with the other half and stuff, that's genuinely when I'm at my happiest. Or when I'm with, we all have those couple of people in our life, those couple of friends that you belly laugh with. And the people that you sit down with, and it doesn't matter. You can say whatever, and you just know it doesn't go anywhere. I've got a friend back in Ireland, a guy called Bernard. We've known each other years, and when I'm with him, I mean, it's just, we don't even have to speak. There's such a friendship and a connection. So I think for me, it's about simplicity, the people in my life, and kind of doing what matters. I think, I love my work, and I feel very privileged and fortunate in my work. So I never feel burdened going to work. I never feel, oh, bloody hell, I don't want to do this. So I think they're the things that make me happy. And the older I get, I realize the stuff that I thought was going to make me happier, the kind of more materialistic stuff, I realize it's noise, and it's, it gets in the way. So yeah, I think the older I get, I'm getting a bit wiser.
Fantastic. And with a glass of wine and some chocolates too, it's perfect. Thank you so much, Owen.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.